So what I liked about benefits, I think you have to be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie to like benefits. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of points of failure, a lot of complaints. So you're never bored and things are always changing.
Welcome to Broken Benefits. I'm your host, Lee Lewis, and this is a podcast where we learn from top employer experts on how to fix our broken benefits to save lives, save dollars, and save your talent. All right, welcome back to Broken Benefits. I'm your host, Lee Lewis, and excited to introduce you today to our guest, Pat Pitsch. Pat was the leader of benefits and total rewards for BNSF Railway for the better part of 2 decades. She helped lead benefits for over 120,000 total lives, $750 million, managing both the administrative population as well as a large union population all across the country, and did that for over a decade with a 2 to 3% trend without cost shifting. So excited to have her on the show, especially to talk about some really momentous experiences and things that she had the chance to be a part of. Pat, welcome to the show. So glad to have you.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So, starting out, would love to hear a little bit about you, of how you got into benefits and what it was that you loved most about being in that role.
I started out my career as a pension actuary. So I worked for about 6 years in consulting, and from there, really transferred to the client side. So what I liked about benefits, I think you have to be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie to like benefits. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of points of failure, a lot of complaints. So you're never bored and things
Yeah.
are always changing.
Oh my goodness, I've never heard it described that way, but if you think about it, yeah, the amount of risk that you have, how many people in any company have like direct visibility into, the full executive team and all their spouses and kids, right? I mean, most people are not under that potential level of dangerous scrutiny, but the benefits leaders are every day of the year. That's a that would sort of spike your cortisol, I think. I you know love that you had, while working as part of, as a Berkshire Hathaway company, and knowing that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have been very vocal about healthcare for decades. What was that like, being part of that organization?
It was interesting. We tried several times as a group, the larger employers in Berkshire Hathaway, to get together and to try to solve, how do we disrupt? Do we have enough numbers in any given market to make a difference? And unfortunately, even with a million plus lives in
Yeah.
any one market, you're just a small player. You really don't have the market power. So a
Yeah.
lot of really good discussions, but we really didn't get a whole lot of traction as a consolidated group in tackling healthcare.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Hello.
Hi, I'm here to pick up a prescription,
Okay. Okay, your total is $80.
but I have insurance.
We ran your insurance. That's just your copay.
Can you hold on to that for me? I'll be back later.
58 million American adults can't afford their prescriptions. Many of these people work for companies just like yours. Start giving your employees 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
Going a little deeper on that, it's notoriously been very challenging to get multiple employers who all have the same goals and similar problems to come together on unified actions to try and make a difference. What were some of the obstacles to achieving that within Berkshire? And I'm sure they're going to be very similar in any type of multi-employer consortium.
I really think it comes down to not wanting to lose control. I made a lot of speeches to my Berkshire Hathaway peers talking about if you really looked at what we were offering in healthcare, the difference, like on an actuarial value, is something between 85 and 95%. We
Mhm.
were all using one of the BUCAs, we were all using the big three. And so, would we really be giving up that much if we all decided, let's go to Blue Cross or let's go to one pharmacy provider? But
Mhm.
unfortunately, that the resistance to losing control is really, I think, the biggest obstacle.
That's makes perfect sense. Have you I guess if you look back over your career, uh, around, several multi-employer initiatives, and we'll talk about HTA and Haven in a second as well. Have what are bright moments of success, if any, that you've seen where employers did successfully take one or more actions together? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about those and what made them different.
So I'd say one that comes to mind was really through the Health Transformation Alliance. So we realized in starting out, we needed to understand the baseline. So data was the most important initiative with the founders of HTA. And so we did have some success getting many of the HTA members to all go into one data warehouse. So we could start with a baseline to be able to measure, as we put initiatives in, were we really making a difference? And we were able to glean quite a few insights using that data because, several of the members were using the same point solutions, for example. We were able to
Mhm.
see, are we really hitting the right people, whether it's a diabetes solution, are we really hitting those people who are non-compliant? So we got some good learnings out of it.
Oh, that's terrific. What do you think made the difference between that initiative and you know maybe dozens of others that didn't work out?
I think the biggest success with the HTA early on was employers driving the different work streams. So
Mm,
employers were in the in the driver's seat. They
mhm.
volunteered to be on these committees. So we had the data committee, employee engagement, medical, pharmacy, the different work streams. And because they were run by employers, and I really think employers look to their peers to really,
Yeah.
for credibility. That's what really made it successful was, joining together and doing. And I would also say on that from the HTA standpoint, there was a definite talk. It was a higher purpose, really. So the
Mm,
basic tenets initially when we put HTA together around floating all boats. Like we, just because we are large employers, we're not going to come together, just be a purchasing coalition so that, downstream, the smaller mid market employers get a worse deal with the same vendors. So the idea was to try to, float all boats with any
mm.
positive outcomes that we could achieve.
Outstanding. I love that. Um, you had the, I think, perfect, sort of courtside seats to see the founding of HTA. What was it like, when that came together? And what was the feeling and the people? I'm was wondering if you could tell that story.
It was exciting. We really thought we were gonna make a difference. So being one of the founders, the advantage, I had within my organization, and I think it helped the whole HA organization, is my CHRO, Riz Chan, had a comp and benefits background. So he had a passion
Mm,
in this area. And then, in addition, our CEO sat on the board of some very large corporations, and he
mm,
always said to us, whether you like it or not, we're in the business of healthcare. So, having
mm,
that internal support as we join this organization we had top leadership on board to say, go out there and disrupt. Let's,
Awesome.
let's shake a few trees. Let's see if we can get some movement, through the process. So we had real good support internally, and so did the other founding members. We had to put in, a pretty large chunk of money to join.
Mhm.
So we had a vested interest in making sure it succeeded.
Mm.
So it's an exciting time.
Oh, that's awesome. What, if you were to think about, I don't know, some of your colleagues or some employers don't have a lot of executive uh, enthusiasm around doing things within healthcare. Many of them might be operating a little bit on an island, and they're managing their health plan and may not have a lot of leadership even that cares that much into the way they structure the benefits or watching the budgets closely, et cetera. Or maybe they're watching it too closely. For colleagues who are in organizations like that, uh, what are what are ways that they can also get involved and try to make a difference? Have you seen successes there, and maybe what are the ways they achieve that?
So I would say bringing in people like yourself, Lee, to educate people who from the outside who are not part of the establishment. So you've got the Bukas, you got the
Mhm.
big three, and then I would say you even have the big three on the consulting side. And they're all,
Yeah.
not to demonize anyone, we're all responsible for where we are today with the system we have, but they're so heavily entrenched in the system. I think
Mm.
bringing in folks like yourself to talk to senior leadership to really give that
Mm.
perspective of, okay, we think we're doing a good job managing benefits. I think everyone thinks they're doing a good job managing benefits,
Sure.
uh, especially the large employers. Although we saw with the
Yeah.
HTA, as we got into like these PBM coalitions, even these massive employers, they didn't have a great deal either. So part
Yeah.
of it is we're so siloed. We need
Mm.
someone to come from the outside who's independent to basically say, whatever you're spending in healthcare, do you realize you could save 25% in one
Right.
year by going
Wow.
to an independent TPA, by moving away from the big three? I think,
Wow.
we need that independent voice because all the major players are so heavily entrenched. They're all basically, telling the story to keep the status quo the way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I uh, I I appreciate that comment also, and I I agree. I think hearing and becoming educated around alternatives is critical.
Well,
Uh,
and people like Dr. Marty McCary, people who speak that
Totally.
the disruption message in a very articulate way. If employers bring him in, have him speak to their leadership, I think it's eye opening.
I I love that. If we look at HTA, so HTA is sort of the early days, the honeymoon has sort of passed. We're now sort of a more mature organization, not old, I guess 6 7 years. Um, what do you think are we could do sort of from a strategy or I guess rallying standpoint to bring some more of that early engagement back? And it may be that it's not even possible, but I'm curious if you have any advice or thoughts on ways that we can still rally and bring those employers together.
Yeah, you've got to really clean up the messaging around disruption. So the establishment, this is the scary boogeyman in the room, disruption, employee noise. I never had employees quit because I made a change in benefits.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fear is 10 times what it needs to be. So creating, and we're trying to do this at my company, create a realistic story around disruption. What does disruption really look like? I mean, whether it's on the pharmacy side, in which case most of that disruption is I went to the pharmacy yesterday, I got a blue pill, today I'm getting a white. So I went from a brand to a generic. I mean, people
Yeah.
don't care. I just think the stories around disruption are huge. That's the number one thing. The second thing that I think could have some traction is this whole fiduciary concept. So think about
Mm,
the 401k world. Remember all the lack of transparency and all those fees that were happening, which we didn't even know what they were. And then the
right.
fiduciary limelight was really put on the employer plan sponsor and the
Mm,
industry, but it was the employer plan sponsor saying basically enforcing, are you really doing your fiduciary duties? Are you doing your fiduciary duty in the healthcare space if you don't really know? Like if you haven't changed your medical carrier in 20 years and you haven't changed your PBM in 20 years, are you really doing your duties
mm,
there? So I think somewhat of a focus on that could really help shift the market.
I love that. I want to go a step deeper on PBM. The big three PBMs have had, 80, 90% of the market forever. And lots of employers with whom I've spoken who have gone to alternative arrangements. They say the service is great. We've got, better pricing. They save money, even though they were told it was impossible. Why is it that more employers haven't gone to these new methods? It seems like enough people have said the water's warm, come swimming, but they don't
Mm,
seem to get the attraction we'd think they would.
There is a, tried and true way of comparing PBMs that's really come up
Mm,
through the consulting firms. That's called
mm,
spreadsheeting. And
okay.
really what it does is it takes the same, AWP starting number across all PBMs in
Right.
order to get an apples to apples comparison. And so that's all that's going to play to is what the big three want you to play to: discounts off
Mm,
brands and rebates. And it never really looks at the lowest net cost. If you
mm,
move to a like a pass through PBM, you're going to move, your formulary is going to shift. It has to because
right.
it's all about lowest net cost. And you're going to get lowest net cost on generics and lower cost brands. Not,
Right.
you're going to get bigger discounts and bigger rebates on a higher ticket price. I mean, that's just the way it works. So we've tried to, educate consulting firms, try to meet them where they are. It's not so much education because it's
Yeah.
complete change in the methodology. Their bread and butter is doing these
Yeah.
RFP comparisons, and we're asking them to do something different to include
How
the
it's
mid.
always been done.
Yep.
Wow. Um, is that resonating, or is there more that we can do, or what are the next steps to try and increase more of this adoption, do you think?
Um, I think it's resonating with some. I think again, the problem is we need to educate the plan sponsors to ask the right questions when they select their consultant,
Mm,
and the right questions around, how much money is changing hands. Are you paid for placing business with this PBM? You know,
yeah,
how much are these coalitions? How can am I really getting an independent look from a consulting firm that has their own coalition? I think these questions need to
right,
be asked. There are a lot of really good boutique, specifically pharmacy consulting firms out there that
right,
I had never heard of, to be honest, till I came to the PBM side of the house, and
yeah.
now I know who they are. But
If you could go back and give yourself, pharmacy advice, and we'll do it for medical also. If you go back in time 10 years and give yourself some training on that, what would you teach your past self?
To really look at that lowest net cost, to ask the formulary piece. So, I kept saying, which is totally true, I have no clinical background. But you know what? I have a math background. And if you tell me
I can
this
add.
this brand costs this much minus a rebate versus this generic. Which one do you want on your formulary? I can make
Right.
that decision without a clinical background. So yeah, that's what I would have educated myself is push harder on that. Do
Mm,
I really need all of these drugs on the formulary? These Me Too drugs, these reconcocted, but now they're extended release where I used to take 3 pills, all of those things that are on the formulary that are
sure.
patent extensions, right, for the brand manufacturers. Um, so really I get, my biggest learning has been it's your formulary, dummy.
Yeah.
It's your formulary that's driving your cost. And that's where
Mhm.
the focus needs to be.
Oh, I love that. What do we say to employers who have gotten hooked on the rebates, where they're spending them on something else, or they've gotten to be a huge number and they sort of look forward to it? I feel like it's a little bit like a tax return. When you get a huge tax return, in April, it's like that's not something to celebrate, right? That means you just paid way too much during the year. But I feel like we've gotten a little bit of that in the rebates, and I'm curious if you have advice on how to get out of it.
Yeah, I have heard that some of my peers that they bucket that money differently. The challenge with that is if we do focus on the whole fiduciary thing,
Yeah.
that practice is really going to come into question, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
No, I
that
think it's good.
how much are you really spending on benefits? How are you determining cost share? Those funds should be included in those dollars when you're looking at how to split cost share between employee and employers.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like it definitely those should be going back into the ERISA budget and being included with that, and it brings up a lot of questions when we have someone buy a more expensive drug because maybe after rebate it is lower cost than the generic, right? So you buy that more expensive drug, but the person who's paying more to the patient, if we don't net the rebate out at the point of sale, then you're having your patient, your employee pay more in order for you to on the back end get a larger amount back that doesn't go to benefit them. I've long been a little concerned with that practice being in place. I don't
Yeah,
know if that's the thing. That's still pretty common, right?
especially with high deductible health plans, you
Oh,
really have to question that practice for sure.
for sure. Oh, you guys now, if I have a pass through PBM and I am doing sort of the formulary review, things like that, does that problem get corrected, or do we still have to be really careful not to fall into that trap?
It 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 definitely helps. You're still getting rebates, so you still have as a plan sponsor a decision. You're getting all your rebates.
Yeah.
That's the difference, right? So you have to be careful. But drugs in general are less expensive when you have a lowest net cost formulary design, right? And
Yeah.
if like in our formulary decisions, if the brand minus the rebate is close to the generic cost, we'll always go with the generic. It
Makes
helps
sense.
us in our buying power with generics, but it also it's time value of
Cleaner.
money. Time value of money, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking like your example on your refund on your taxes. Why let someone else hold the money for
Of course.
half a
Yeah,
year?
just that float. It's like you're not getting interest on that, and it can be months.
Exactly.
To say nothing of the problem with the high deductible health plans, et cetera. No, that makes perfect sense. That sounds like the right approach. Uh, I want to talk for a little bit about Haven. You had again front row seats to its creation. You were part of Berkshire Hathaway, so kind of Warren Buffett was involved in that. How did that come about? How did you learn about it? And maybe you could walk us through the narrative of the story of how that was founded.
Yeah, how it came about, as I understand it, was just literally a conversation between the 3 CEOs, to really say, "Why are we allowing this to happen? Why are we spending so much money?" And I know Warren Buffett always talked about Europe and the difference in cost, and
Yeah.
are we really getting the quality we need? So they truly thought that they could go out there and disrupt the market. It did get a little attention, obviously, at the
Mhm.
beginning with those big names. Unfortunately, all the constituencies within the various firms sort of raised their heads and said, "Wait a minute, we're investing for all of these mainstream healthcare, providers. We don't want to
Yeah.
make them mad." So there was a lot of noise happening on the financial aisles of these
Yeah.
firms, and it really just sort of eroded the momentum from the get go in terms of like what we could do. There were
Mm.
some small attempts at projects. Again, it started with data, but even getting all the data in one place was no easy task with three large employers like not wanting to share
Right.
data. So, yeah, and again, the same thing, market power.
Mm.
I think it was 2.2 million lives or something. But if you looked at any geography, it was like maybe the state of Ohio, there was enough,
Ah,
and there was a pilot done there,
right.
but really not enough momentum.
That's interesting. Uh, in terms of buying power, how do you think about that? Is it that you need buying power in a market in order to reshape the incentives, or is it to try and command a better unit cost? How do they think about that?
Yeah, I think it's more in any markets around disruption, right? And
Mhm.
maybe it doesn't have to be a local market. This is what I always think about in the PBM space. If large employers really made a commitment to just walk away from the big three and say, we're not going to do that model, that would get the big three's attention and things would change. That's the market disruption, right? We wanted with HTA was really,
Mhm.
let's move away from the bukas. Let's say
Right.
we don't like this model. It's not working for us. You won't give us our data.
Right.
You stand in the way of us carving things out for centers of excellence. Let's move away and send a message. But we can't just seem to get enough people aligned for long enough to make it happen, right? I mean, that's the challenge.
Right.
That's the challenge. I feel like it's a domino effect. Like
Mhm.
whatever market will happen will shake up the big players. They will.
Right.
The big players were nervous when we went out with HTA and all of our announcements. What
Right.
we, what I think we did wrong was we became a purchasing coalition.
Mm.
There was kind of the chicken and the egg. We had to fund HTA in order to hire people to run HTA because we
Right.
all we all had jobs,
Okay.
very busy jobs at our corporations. So in order to generate that revenue, we had to do something that was a little easier, faster. And so we went down the path of a truly just a purchasing coalition where we got a better deal within the existing structure. And that I think that took all the big players, and they went, ah, big sigh of relief. Because they
And
realized we really weren't doing anything that drastic or disruptive.
and if we were to do one big bold thing and we knew it would succeed, what do you think would be the right play?
A big bold thing would be to, again, you've got to move away from those big players. So it's
Yeah,
got
it's
to be
get an alternative to the standard model, right?
and I had a 5-year plan. I started with carving out specialty medication. Then I was going to
Mm,
move to a pass through. Then I
okay,
was then I was gonna do the big, buy bukas and go to a web TPA or a
right. Oh, I
American
love this. Keep
or
walking us through this. Okay, so let just to pause a little bit on these because I think this is marvelous advice. So, step 1 was carve specialty drug. Is that because that only impacts, like,
correct.
1% of people? Like, it's this is
Absolutely,
not a capital D disruption, this is almost a rounding error, no one will even really know, but the
absolutely.
dollars are still pretty big.
Yeah, the dollars are
Got it.
significant, half of your pharmacy spend, and yet it's 2% of your people. Exactly.
Okay, perfect. So that seems like a really logical first step. Huge savings, very, very small amount of people. Step 2 is a pass-through PBM.
Right. So
Is that
take
right?
all the
Okay.
rest of the drugs and go to a pass through, lowest net cost formulary, and you can do
Okay.
this through education. We
Okay.
spent an inordinate amount of time educating our employees year over year at BNSF, and they could cite our 70-30 split. They knew every
Mm,
time I got up there, every year, talked about open enrollment. Here's where we were last year. Here's why we are changing.
mm.
So you can do a really good job educating. And like I say, every large player is in the healthcare business. It's worth the time and money if you can potentially save hundreds of millions of dollars to make these changes. And to do it, you've got to bring your employees with you. You got to educate them and bring them on board with the messaging.
Oh, okay. And so, but you had 100,000 people. How do you educate 100,000 people when they don't, a lot of people don't really want to be educated on this stuff?
Yeah, we had the advantage of town halls.
Okay.
So, um, town halls, and then on the union side, we had a wellness team that was boots on the ground in the field. So they
Okay.
were they were integrated with the kickoff of whether it's a maintenance away blitz or you know, some kind of a project. They were there at the time of the safety briefing and they had an opportunity to talk to our union people. So, definitely in an environment like that where most people are not on computers, getting in front of them was
Mhm.
really important. So,
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Oh, I heard you got off social media.
Yeah, actually, it was just kind of depressing.
Did you know that 1 in 3 fundraisers on GoFundMe are for medical bills? And many of these people work for companies just like yours. Start giving your employees 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
Makes sense. Okay, so we educate well around the 70-30. We're in the healthcare business. We're in this together. We need to keep our costs reasonable. We're taking steps to do so. We've now carved out our PBM and savings there. What another? What's typical savings if we now move, not carving out a PBM away from a carrier, that's table stakes, but moving away from a big three to a fully pass through model with a waste eliminating formulary.
it's like last year when we onboarded, there's a range for sure. Some had more tightly controlled formulators to start with,
Right.
but it's in the range of 15 to 25% of your pharmacy spend.
That's 22-23% of total spend anyway. So this is it's flat trend. That's a year of flat trend, really.
Yeah,
It's awesome. Okay, so we got this big savings from the specialty drug carve out that nearly flattens trend. Next year we move to a pass through PBM that gets us flat trend for a year. Year 3, now it's administration. Same network, but we're going to carve out administration on medical. Is that right?
that's right. Move to an
Okay.
independent
Okay.
with the idea that you can get your data
Yeah.
and that you can work with any players you want to and get the cooperation you need, the centers of excellence, the things you want to carve out, um,
That's right.
and tightly control whether it's a cancer solution or MSK solution, whatever it is that you can, get your data and see if there is an impact. So
No, you hit all the big things. You move to the independent TPA, you get all your data, you get control over your plan design and interesting different approaches within what you can do with plan design options. You get control over all of your vendors, carve in, carve out, and the way that you structure that. and you get control over the money, right? You've now got better handle over your own checkbook, so that you can have insight and kind of fiduciary oversight. Uh, and then also direct contracting is a big one, where you can have more, direct arrangements. And also, for whatever reason, there's usually 3 to 6% savings that just sort of falls out of air, that even without any plan design changes, and even without a network change, uh, we see that gets you another year of flat trend.
It does.
Okay.
There are a lot of fees built into the BUCAs that you don't always have visibility to. So that may be where the 3 to whatever 6% fallout is.
There's never an explanation. We've never,
Right.
there's no explanation. There's no actuarial. It's breaking the laws of physics from an actuarial standpoint, but it seems to happen with a lot of regularity. So then what happens kind of in years 4 and 5? What were you thinking there?
I think you and I have had this discussion back when you were my people's consultant. Really focus, I mean, put all your focus where your dollars are, right? MSK solutions that avoid surgery, um,
Hmm.
cancer solutions where you're
Hmm.
sending, certainly if you have a rural population like we had at the railroad, sending them to centers of excellence or um, option in terms of a second opinion. But putting those things in, we always put those things in as voluntary, and I always wanted to put them in as
Right.
mandatory. I
Right.
I just felt like saying, you don't have the right to go to a butcher and end up with an infection. Sorry. We're going to make you go to a quality provider. I always want, even when they were voluntary, they were incredibly successful. And these people are not going to get MRSA and be in the hospital for,
Right.
2 months at a time. So that kind of savings, cost avoidance, it's a hard argument to make, certainly with your finance people,
Right.
but there is cost avoidance when you go to quality, right? It's not
Too.
only those side effects, but it's also just the fact that your, low value care is eliminated, right?
100%. And it's sad, but oftentimes the biggest ROIs we have are the hardest ones to demonstrate. There seems to be often an inverse correlation between concrete savings and magnitude. Uh, no, you're exactly right. And that then gets into, okay, I think the longest putt is getting into full steerage, right? Of to where we're able to get people to the right place at the right time, and all, with the right physician and right cost, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that? Nobody's figured this out yet, I don't think. And but if we don't, we're toast, because that's long term. That's the only way to start realigning incentives.
Yeah, it is a tough one because you want to get people earlier and earlier and earlier. The last thing you want is to, somebody goes in for approval on a surgery they're going to have Monday, and you say, "Oh, that surgeon's not even in the network."
Right.
That creates a
I've been
lot of
planning this for
noise.
months.
So I mean, it's just got to be, both a website and a phone option to
Mhm.
one of these concierge services. That the way to access care, no matter what it is, has got to be
Right.
pre-approved. And I know we sort of try that in the HMO uh,
Right.
days and made people really mad, but the tools weren't really there at the time. Now there are these
Mm,
concierge type services. Um, and some of these, like, Cigna has done some of this with the Local Plus, made it
right.
easier where you call in and, I obviously head of management. I'm always going to be the one calling in to make sure it's working before I announce it, right?
Right.
It worked great. I mean, I call in and say, "Hey, I need lab work. Where should I go?" And the person is like, knew right away. It's either Quest or LabCorp. They're both in network. Go to either one
That's
um,
great.
before you go, right? And it's got to be easy. They got to pick up the phone. And I think a lot of these is they just don't work well in practice. right?
Mm,
It's a
mhm.
website that's clunky, or you call and the person's not trained properly. So I always thought there is a way to do this because
Yeah.
we did it in benefits. I mean, we had all those employees, and when you're there 20 years, it's like a small town, everybody knows your name. So
Yeah.
they would call and say, "Hey, how do I find a good surgeon?" Here's you can see on the website, there's a designation next to it. So I think it can be done. It's just not being done well, and so it kind of
Mhm.
gets a bad name.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. It's funny, uh, Barry, who used to run the benefits over at Michelin, he'd always have little quips. He used to say, "If we pay, we get a say," as a way to sort of approach and think about uh, steerage generally, right? And getting people to the right place. And the 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 analogy that always helps me the most is, every time I go to WebMD, I come away with the self-diagnosis of cancer, right? Like it always I always end up with a cancer scare. But if I walked into a hospital at that point and demanded chemo, they no one's going to give that to me. And no one will feel bad about not giving that to me, right? Like,
Mhm.
no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to pay for it. Even if the doctor was like, okay, I'm down for it, right? Like, if you're not going to get it from me, you'll go get it from somebody else. So sure, I'll give you chemo. And but the plan says no, right? Because there's not a credible diagnosis that has occurred, assuming the doctor, doesn't fabricate anything. But we're not going to pay for that because it's not credible. And for a lot of procedures, um, there's plenty of data that shows that the way we're diagnosing today is not credible. We know that half of back surgeries are unnecessary. We know that. It's well documented, well demonstrated. The orthos know this. Just every patient who walks in, no, you're one of the good ones, right? Like you're not the half that is unnecessary. Yours is definitely necessary, and we continue unchanged. Um, but if you have requirements like you're saying, we already have those requirements in place for other things. We just need to be consistent.
Well, and your example is a good one because when it is done well, people there isn't noise. Like we put a
Yeah.
surgical COE in, and a big part of that was avoiding surgeries. And so we followed those people to see were they going back through the broader network and having the surgery, and they weren't. So something was being done right in terms of having the conversation with the individual about why surgery was not going to help that
Right.
person. So it has to be done well. And I think of like our prior authorizations, we deny more than half. And you would think that would create a lot of noise when you compare like the big three are in the 85% approvals.
Right.
You'd think we would have noise, yet our net promoter scores are really high. And the reason for that
Hmm.
is it's being done well.
Isn't
It's
that
being done.
interesting?
A clinician is speaking to a clinician, so it doesn't give the doctor the opportunity to kind of badmouth the insurance company, right?
Right.
So
Right.
when it works well and there's data and science behind it, and you have educated people delivering the message,
Yeah.
it works. So we just have to avoid having people who aren't clinicians, who aren't trained, delivering these messages because the member doesn't believe it. They think it's trying to save money, and they don't believe it's not for their health, the best outcome for them.
There's one story I want to hear. Surgery Plus is one of the kind of the largest and broadest center of excellence vendors in the country. Their retention's really good. Customers seem to really like them, but they weren't always like that. And in speaking with their some of their leadership in moments of clarity, they credit you with having a huge impact on them being successful today. And I'd love to hear the story about how you you sort of fixed Surgery Plus?
Well, we had our first in-person meeting with them and went down to Dallas to meet in their office. And before the meeting opened, I said, "Well, I've got an agenda of my own. You are on the brink. Let me just get this perfectly clear before we start. You are on the brink of being terminated,
Yeah.
and here's why." And so, John Zetter, very gracious person, the
Yeah.
CEO of Surgery Plus, was astounded. But we had a wonderful conversation about what was working, and what was not working.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about these entrepreneurs who are disruptors is they want to align with what the plan sponsor wants. They want all the incentives to line up together. Um,
Right.
they want to do the right thing, the same thing we wanted to do as a plan sponsor. So that kind of alignment and listening and being flexible like that, um, it's it's rare, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Truly. No, I mean, yeah, by his telling, it's, "Hey, you're fired, like, it's over. You're not worth removing mid-year, so I'm just waiting the clock out. Do you have any questions?" And how did they turn that around? I think he was a new CEO at the time and was there to change things, but what did they do differently that made that work? I'm so curious about that because it's really hard to turn a business around, and usually you see them all going the other direction.
Yeah, he did 2 things. One is they pre-contracted, so they went out in our big markets and did the contracting they needed to do.
Mm,
Before that, they were waiting to see if somebody have a surgical thing in Bozeman, Montana. Where's the nearest? I mean, it took way too long, so there weren't
right.
any surgeons available. And the second thing was just service. I
Yeah.
mean, he really got in there as far as I could tell, and just said, "We're gonna set up, processes and SLAs and all that, to really, create a higher quality customer care facility." So, those were really the 2 things that really improved the product for us.
Yeah. I feel like you realigned the incentives for them and gave them a chance to see if they could do anything about it, and that there was a total transformation there. And man, I have to feel like that could be a microcosm of what we might deliver the industry if we're successful, is if we can realign the incentives. How many of these hospitals and ASCs and large providers and systems would sit down and hustle in order to survive, in order to thrive, and
Right.
change the way everything's done. But
Right.
uh, I appreciate everything you're doing. Now, if someone wants to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way what's the best way to reach you?
I'd say connect LinkedIn. I'm out there,
Yeah.
Pat Pitch, Pitsch. Love to connect with others who want to disrupt the healthcare industry.
No, I love it. Well, appreciate it. This has been wonderful. And thank you for being here with us today. And thank you to everyone listening. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. If this was helpful, please forward to any friends or colleagues who might be able to enjoy this. Also, please like and subscribe. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Lee Lewis from Broken Benefits. Thanks for joining us on Broken Benefits. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, please share today's show with a friend or colleague. It's free to do, and it helps us spread the message to as many people as possible. Until next time.